will you call the roll for us?
Delegate Keene.
Mark, you got to unmute.
The-
Unmute, Mark.
Hold on. Yeah. Present.
Delegate Converse-Fowler.
Present.
Delegate Askew.
Present.
Delegate Hodges.
Here.
Delegate Ranson.
Margaret, you there?
I'm here. Yes, here.
Senator Kiggins.
Here.
Senator Locke.
Present.
Adria McClellan.
Present.
Chris Stone.
Present.
Joseph Bouchard.
Here.
Chair Lewis.
Here.
All right, Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And I think one of the first order of business should be to introduce our clerk. Sean, you're fresh on board. Are you there?
I am.
Oh, there you are. You moved.
Pardon me.
Okay. So how long have you been with legislative service or with the clerk's office?
Just about 2 weeks now, so just getting started. Came recently from Texas, where I worked with their legislature.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we're an easy group. You picked a heck of a time to come on board in the middle of a pandemic, but we'll try and take it easy on you.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome.
Yep. So I just wanted to say a few things before we get into our program. Obviously, we've got a full plate today and limited time, and I'm conscious of everybody's time. But wanted to get into for some of our newer members about the role of the committee. The flooding committee is an advisory committee, and so typically what we have done, or historically what we have done under Senator Locke's leadership and Delegate Stiley's leadership for a number of years, is we don't make any formal recommendations towards the end of the year prior to the legislative session, as we will do in December, and we'll talk about that a little later. We get together and actually throughout the course of the year, we get together formally and informally and just brainstorm about certain ideas that we may have gleaned from the presentations that we have before our committee, and that results in legislation. And so that's how we have typically worked. As you may know, for those of you who aren't legislators, we are a part-time legislature, and we have a staff of one who handles everything. And then we lean on legislative services for a lot of other support work as well when it comes to obviously drafting of legislation. And so hopefully when we get together, and we'll talk about the December meeting a little bit more towards the end of the program, we'll have an idea about some, and actually, of course, I know Delegate Converse-Fowler and I will be carrying at least one piece of legislation that we will be talking about. She may want to talk about it today, or maybe we may put it off till December, regarding resiliency and smart scale. And I know a number of you have ideas as well before we go into the legislative session. Now, let me preface all that by saying nobody knows what this legislative session is going to look like. And there have been some talk among individual members about, well, maybe we go back to the original purpose of the short session and just tinker with a budget and go home. Or maybe we reduce the number of bills that we have. We've already got a bill limit, but maybe we reduce it even more because of this pandemic. So I guess we really won't know that until we see what kind of shape we're in towards the middle of December as far as the pandemic goes and the logistics go. I know the folks in the House will be up on the ballot in 2021, and I'm sure they're brimming with lots of ideas that they would like to legislate on. And so I know that's going to be a little bit of a problem for us trying to trim things down. So that's the one caveat when we talk about legislation. We may have to really prioritize this year more than any other, and try and really narrow our focus a little bit. And the other thing about procedure is the legislators on here know this, and just for all of you, typically the way we work with this is that if you have questions, they flow through the chair. So if somebody's presenting, it makes it smoother for the committee, and it's also just the way we do things in the legislature, that if you have a question, you really run it through the chair. And oftentimes it may be such that the presentation is one that we just don't feel comfortable interrupting because it interrupts the flow. And I think the master plan that we're about to hear about is probably one of those presentations where questions would be best held till the end if you can do that. And so with that, I think we are ready because obviously, as I said, we've got Secretary Strickler here and Admiral Phillips to give us an update on the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. And go at it, fellas, and Senator Ann.
Thank you, Chairman Lewis. I appreciate that, and thank you all for letting me have the opportunity to chat with you today. It's good to see so many familiar faces. I wish we could be doing it in person, but hopefully we'll get this virus under control soon and be able to all get back together in short order. I just wanted to say on behalf of the governor and as the Chief Resilience Officer of the Commonwealth that we're very excited about working together with you all on kind of taking what we've developed in the master planning framework that I'm going to present to you all today and turning it into Virginia's first kind of bona fide statewide or at least coastwide coastal resilience master plan. I know there are a lot of folks out there with a lot of great ideas. The communities that you all come from, the communities that you all represent, your background and expertise is really invaluable to us as we're working through this. So looking forward to this being the beginning of a good conversation and certainly an exchange of ideas. I've got a brief presentation that I'm going to try. I'm a little technically challenged, but to put up on the screen so you all can see it. And I will run through that quickly and then answer any questions you have, if that sounds okay, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine.
All right, let's see if we can make this happen. All right, can folks see the beginning of a slide deck?
Not yet.
All right. That's problematic. Let me try this again. All right, how about now?
Yeah, I think you're getting there. There you go.
All right, there we go. Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thanks, I appreciate that. All right, let me back out of this real quickly so that I can see what we're working with. All right, so as you all know, Governor Northam's Executive Order 24 that he promulgated in around this time, actually 2 years ago in 2018, called for the development of a coastal resilience master plan in the Commonwealth. And over the past 2 years, we've been collecting information, working with experts and stakeholders to lay the groundwork for that plan. And that process has culminated in the release of the master planning framework document that came out that the governor announced a couple weeks ago now. In order to guide decision-making under this framework and getting towards the development of a full master plan, the governor has established 5 guiding principles through the framework that are outlined here, and I'll tick through them really quickly. The purpose of these is to kind of be, our guide star, really the framing for how we're going to do coastal resilience planning, at least at the state level. And the first of those is to really, understand and acknowledge climate change and the consequences that we are seeing, particularly from sea level rise, but also from more intense coastal storms and more intense and heavier precipitation events that are causing challenges with stormwater from those storms, and really focusing on the best available science. We've got incredible academic institutions in Virginia, from VIMS to Old Dominion, UVA and Virginia Tech both now have coastal centers and a lot of expertise kind of across the Commonwealth. And so we wanted to make sure that we brought in all of that expertise, all of that research to be a part of our master planning process and to guide development of the master plan. The second point is to enhance equity in coastal resilience, identifying and addressing the socioeconomic inequities and trying to do what we can through our coastal adaptation and protection efforts to make sure that no communities are getting left behind. And this is something that's really important to the governor, both in rural and urban areas. Coming from the Eastern Shore as he does and having represented Matthews County, I think he knows as well as anybody some of the challenges that rural coastal Virginia faces and some of the resource limitations and things like that that are really a struggle sometimes. And on the other side of the coin, there are communities in our cities, our more populous jurisdictions that are underserved, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of folks there as well, and giving them options for how they can continue to keep their communities viable. The third point in the guiding principles is a focus on natural and nature-based solutions, and the General Assembly kind of memorialized this first last year in the Coastal Flood or Community Flood Preparedness Fund when we passed the RGGI-related legislation with a focus on natural and nature-based solutions. And this is really recognizing the importance of protecting and enhancing our green infrastructure, natural coastal barriers, wetlands, coastal forests, floodplains, and things like that not only give us resilience and in a lot of ways are our most effective resilient solutions, but also help protect habitat for fish and wildlife and Chesapeake Bay water quality as well. So looking to natural and nature-based solutions as a big focus of the kinds of things that we want to do, realizing that in many cases for critical infrastructure, we're going to have no choice but to try to harden shorelines and armor those assets in certain circumstances if that's the only option. The fourth point here is looking at a region-specific approach. Another piece of the code that was authorized or memorialized in the Community Flood Preparedness Fund legislation was community scale projects and looking to kind of find economies of scale and do smart planning that deals with more than one home or a handful of homes and actually is looking kind of across communities and across regions to try to find the approaches that are going to be more broadly effective, allow us to protect more of the things that we want to protect at a lower cost and in a more efficient way. And then tailoring those approaches to the needs of specific individual communities. We know that there's a lot of diversity along Virginia's coast, and certainly we want to make sure that once we've got kind of regional approaches that we're drilling down, working with the planning district commissions, working with the local governments, and working at the community level to make sure that our strategies are sound and that we're trying to channel resources to the places that need them most. And then finally, I spoke about this a little bit in the last piece, but looking for cost-effective solutions, understanding the fiscal realities that we're facing. We'll never be able to afford to pour enough concrete to armor all of our shorelines and create physical, gray barriers to, against the threats that we face. And the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, while it's a great tool, is not going to allow us to do that either. And there are other kind of synergies that we'll talk about as well that will help us guide additional funding and focus our other assets and resources on this plan and through the framework. But again, looking for cost-effective solutions to community and coastal adaptation and protection. And protecting critical infrastructure is really something that the governor values and that we think is an important approach. So keeping these the primary goals in mind, the framework also sets, the guiding principles in mind, the framework also sets 4 primary goals for how we're going to develop the plan. The first is to identify and prioritize projects. That's certainly a heavy lift, but we've got a head start, especially in some of the jurisdictions that already have their own local plans and have done some regional planning to look at individual projects that would need to go into the master plan. And we're hopeful that and believe that a lot of that will be plug and play. There are other areas that may not have done quite as much research and may need some help from us and some resources to get started on that kind of capacity building and planning exercise. And that's great. We want to be able to provide that help, and we want to help localities identify for the master plan the things that are important to protect. The second is developing a financing strategy. And you know, I've mentioned a couple times, I'm sure you all want to talk about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, but there are bigger pots of money out there that really impact coastal resilience. One of those is the grant projects that come from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development through our Department of Housing and Community Development, those block grants, such as the one that was used for the Ohio Creek watershed project in the city of Norfolk recently, and then that project is underway. I have a lot of potential for resilience, and we've been working closely with DHCD on that. In addition, the money that comes from FEMA through our Department of Emergency Management, and particularly on the mitigation side for hazard mitigation as well, there's a lot of potential there. And so we've been working with VDEM as well, and the framework memorializes the objective at the state level for all of those activities to be coordinated in the coastal area under the master planning framework and through the master plan, so that we're all pulling in the same direction. Another component of this financing strategy is going to be looking to use this framework and to use the subsequent master plan as a jumping off point for working with the Army Corps of Engineers, for engaging in the Water Resources Development Act process at the federal level, to make sure that all states, frankly, that have this kind of a well thought out framework, but certainly the Commonwealth is able to go up there and say, hey, we've got a plan, we've got good ideas, and these are things that the community support, their support at the state level. We can put some skin in the game. Let's get cracking, and hopefully that'll be attractive to Congress and attractive to the federal agencies as well. The third piece is incorporating climate change projections, and we've already got a head start on this through Executive Order 45 that the governor issued last spring for state-owned buildings and properties in the Commonwealth. We're using the NOAA intermediate high sea level rise projection for planning. And we're certainly, and I know this is a topic other folks want to talk about, looking at projections for rainfall, our rainfall projections for climate change, our inundation models, and those are things that are certainly underway as well. So we want to make sure that all of that gets incorporated into our state programs, and that we're able to work with regions and localities to adopt that as well. I guess I'll also note that the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission has adopted the same sea level rise curve for its planning purposes. So that's a good synergy there. And last of the primary goals is making sure that we coordinate our efforts. I've spoken a little bit on the funding piece about how we want to make sure that we're all on the same page there, as how our, the things that we spend money on, whether it's federal grant dollars or state funds, are all kind of moving us in the same direction towards a more resilient coast. But there's certainly a lot of other coordination that can be done on the interagency level. The framework document, if you have time to get down in the weeds on it, lists all of our state hazard mitigation programs and anything that touches on resilience that a state agency is doing, and there are dozens of them. And we need to do a better job of coordinating across all of those different programs and all of those different state agencies to make sure that we're maximizing the impact that we have for a resilient coast. The next thing that the framework does after outlining those principles and goals is to break down the coastal part of Virginia into 4 planning regions for the master plan framework. And you can see here on the map, those 4 regions are Hampton Roads, which is the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, rural coastal Virginia, which includes the Eastern Shore, Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission, the Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck Planning District Commissions, and then the 2 kind of farther inland but still coastal regions, the Fall Line North region, which is Greater Washington and Northern Virginia regional commissions, and then what we're calling the Fall Line South region, which is the Crater PDC and Plan RVA, which used to be the Greater Richmond PDC. These are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination as far as drawing the lines exactly how they need to be. I mean, there's certainly some overlap between some of these adjacent regions, but they all share, the communities within each of these regions share common threads, socioeconomically, geographically, physically, and with respect to threats that we felt were important enough to put them in together and define these different regions. And this is an approach that we, with full disclosure, borrowed from the state of Texas and its master planning effort. We think it's one that fits the Commonwealth and will help us, kind of keep track a little bit better of what needs to be, what's going on already, what needs to go on, and what we're going to be able to help support within each of these regions that again share some commonalities. So now that we have guiding principles, primary goals, and defined planning regions, what's next? And the next thing is to put this framework into action. This isn't a document that we want to see sit on the shelf. The governor wants us to get cracking and make an impact here and use this framework for what it was designed to be used for. And that's what we plan to do. So right now, the things that are underway in the fall of 2020 are, first and foremost, we're working to develop a community outreach plan. Admiral Phillips is the point person on that. I know she's already been talking to the planning district commissions. We're presenting to you today, and we're putting together kind of a long slate of outreach activities that we want to do to make sure that communities across the coastal Virginia are aware of this effort and are engaged in it. And that's really important to the governor. It's very important to me. And we certainly want your ideas for opportunities to engage with communities, particularly with stakeholders who may not always have a seat at the table and may not be aware and have the capacity or ability to follow what's going on, in meetings like this. So certainly on the outreach front, we're going to be very aggressive and try to be very thorough. But again, would really like your input on groups or communities that you think we need to get into and ways to get in with those folks. Second, we're going to be establishing the technical advisory committee that the governor laid out in the framework. That's going to be really important. That's the group that we think will be able to help Admiral Phillips and myself and our state agencies do a number of things, but first and foremost to take this effort from a planning framework to an actual master plan, looking at vetting the specific project proposals that need to go into the master plan and helping guide, give advice on good projects to use our limited resources through the Flood Preparedness Fund and other resources. And finally, the other thing that we're working on, and the General Assembly gave us authorization in the recently passed budget to do this, is to use the Department of Conservation and Recreation's existing line of credit for a request for proposal for a consultant to help the TAC and help Ann and help me develop the kind of a full coastal study, which will inform selection of the projects that need to be included in the master plan. And we've got a lot of good data already from a lot of our communities and from our scientific institutions. We need help pulling all that together. And we need to identify the gaps and fill in those gaps, those knowledge gaps where they exist. So certainly appreciate the General Assembly's support of that effort, and that will allow us to go ahead and get that process started now versus waiting until the spring when we have money coming into the Flood Preparedness Fund. And moving over to the right hand of this slide, so we're through the fall. General Assembly session, as Chairman Lewis mentioned, is a little bit uncertain. We've got some legislative items that I think we like to consider related to this, but it's a little bit unclear how that's going to proceed. So just putting a pen in that for a moment and looking towards the spring, Virginia will participate in its first auction as a member of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in March. And at that point, we will know how much funding we're going to get in for that quarter, their quarterly auctions that gets deposited into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. And so that's one big milestone. In advance of that, we'll certainly be working to develop the guidelines that are required under law for reviewing projects and expending money from that fund. We're very deep into the initial drafting phase of that. Our plan was to get the framework out first, and then that will be the next step that we take. So you can expect to see draft guidelines out for public comment from us at some point next month, and then we'll do hopefully another kind of robust public comment and outreach process to get feedback on that draft and get good ideas about how we want to tweak that so that we're ready when we get the REGI money in to start getting money out the door, both for planning for areas that still need some help and capacity with planning, and then if there are projects that are ready to roll, to start supporting some of those as well. In addition, we're going to be working on a coastal relocation handbook. This is something that I think is really important. Certainly, the idea of strategic coastal relocation is a challenging one to think about, but it's one that we have to think about and we have to talk about. There's some communities that where they sit now are looking at not being viable in the coming years, and so being able to offer options and assistance to communities that voluntarily want to take the step of considering relocation is something that's really important to the governor and that we need to do. So again, this is kind of an assistance exercise. It's certainly not something that we're looking to tell people what they've got to do. We just want to be able to help them should they make that decision and have a kind of a stepwise process to go through. And then, of course, next fall, we're working diligently towards getting a full coastal master plan released. And that's certainly a heavy lift, but with the process I just outlined, I feel pretty confident that we can get there. So just a little bit more detail on this slide about what the planning process is going to look like. We've got the Chief Resilience Officer and the Special Assistant kind of sitting on top of the TAC and chairing and running that committee. We'll have a lot of outreach. We'll have a lot of back and forth between communities and the TAC, and then the TAC will inform our decision making. Both the TAC and my office and Ann's office are going to be staffed and assisted by the Coastal Zone Management Program. They've got a lot of expertise and a lot of capacity as coastal managers. And Laura McKay, as you all know, runs a really great shop over there. So she's agreed to help us out on issues of coastal resilience. So that's a really great thing. And then once we've got a master plan in place, the idea is to continue this iterative process with all these stakeholders and all this outreach and our technical advisors and our staff to every 5 years update the plan again. And certainly I will not be here at that point, but and Governor Northam won't either, but we're hoping that this is something that can survive future administrations. We think it's a really strong way to approach this really challenging problem into the future. So just a little bit more on the RFP. Again, we're looking to get a kind of a fuller coastal analysis than we have, a more comprehensive look at what our critical and built natural infrastructure is, our gaps, and looking at the economic impacts. And that will help us develop the database that we use for project prioritization, both within the master plan and for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, the coastal portion of that. There's certainly a portion of that that'll go towards inland and riverine flood protection as well. But that's going to help us get towards the master plan, towards our first list of priority projects. So again, immediate actions, we're looking to set up the TAC. We're looking to bring the Coastal Zone Management program in to staff us. Those two actions will likely be memorialized in the coming days in formal executive actions from Governor Northam. And then the community engagement piece, as I mentioned before, is really critical. And that's the other thing that we're going to be moving very quickly on. So that is That is what I've got. That's my presentation. Appreciate you all bearing with me. And at this point, I will be quiet and open it up for questions.
Okay, Matt, let me start off. I have a question, if I might, Mr. Secretary Strickler. There has been a lot of talk recently about once the dust settles from last night, some renewed bipartisan effort for a large infrastructure bill, probably along the lines of also helping with some economic activity, encouraging some economic activity during this pandemic. And so to your point about the full coastal analysis and looking at these projects and everything, how can we be geared up as quickly as possible to have identified now I know HRPDC and Councilwoman McClellan can probably speak to their efforts in the city of Virginia Beach individually, have already done a lot of work. Do we have to reinvent the wheel? Can we use a lot of the work that they've done in identifying projects in their particular regions in order to perhaps be in the best position possible should some infrastructure bill come to fruition in the spring?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. It's exactly the right thing to be thinking about. And the short answer is yes, we absolutely want to use existing information to feed into that process. Admiral Phillips has gone to Congress a number of times in the last 2 years and testified before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and others about this issue and said specifically, look, Virginia is working on a plan. We're going to have a really nice, tight, data-driven way to prioritize projects, and we will be able to identify for you, what projects those are and where we need the help. And that should be worth something, right? I mean, the states that have their ducks in a row and are ready to roll, we believe should receive more immediate and special consideration when those kinds of packages are passed. And so we've been pushing on Congress to take that approach. The governor has sent, I think, multiple letters at this point to that effect. And this is one of the reasons why it's really important to have the Commonwealth involved and not just have, localities doing their own thing, because we can serve to work with all the planning district commissions, all the localities that have priorities, put those together and send them up in a package and say, these are the things that the Commonwealth, sees as really critical and really important to work on right now.
Thanks. Anybody else questions for Secretary Strickler?
Mr. Chair, can I
Councilwoman McClellan. Go ahead.
just to add to your point, Norfolk has a list of projects in the the WRDA appendices that would be shovel ready. They're only related to tidal flooding. Of course, they're not stormwater related. I know Virginia Beach has their list. Hampton's got some projects. At the PDC level, we've tried to inventory those, but we don't have any sense of prioritization at this point. I mean, we couldn't tell you what there's no sort of benefit cost analysis that's been done at the state level or the regional level to prioritize those. So if we're talking about something that would happen this spring or summer, it'll be interesting to see how we figure out what list to put together, because I don't think we're quite there yet, but it'd be great to have that problem for sure. So, and as Secretary Strickler, we talked about this with the PDCs earlier today, and did a great job presenting to all the coastal PDCs. And we had a pretty robust conversation about assistance for communities who want to relocate. And there's a lot of pushback on that in terms of prioritizing that and the idea of creating a handbook for relocation, which is basically retreat. And while I appreciate, we all understand the need to have that included from a priority standpoint, I just don't see us talking a lot about retreat yet. And if the Commonwealth is going to provide assistance for communities for relocation, what would that look like? Is that financial assistance?
Councilwoman McClellan, thank you for the question, and certainly good to see you. I think the first type of assistance is putting together this document, this handbook to guide any locality that's interested in looking into that as an option through the process. and again, this would all be voluntary. This is not something that we are saying that any community has to do or needs to do or should do, even if they don't want to. This is something that's going to be driven from the bottom up if any community decides that it wants to do it. So with that said, I think if a community does decide that yes, it makes sense for us to move certain infrastructure or to make any of those types of decisions, then I do think that that's the kind of thing that would be, we haven't developed the guidelines fully yet, but I think probably would be eligible for application, at least through the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and potentially other funding mechanisms in the Commonwealth if land acquisition is a component, and there's a conservation component as well. So. I think the answer to your question is potentially yes, but again, it's not something that we're trying to force on anybody. It's just it's an option for localities to think about and potentially choose if that's what their reality looks like.
So Mr. Chair, just to make a point that the cost of doing something like that would be so extraordinary. And I just want to be, I don't know, it's definitely that needs to be a tool in the toolkit. I just, at the local level, I would just say, we get $1 million maybe from FEMA every year, and we might be able to buy out 2 or 3 properties. So moving a community would be a really big lift, no pun intended. So from prioritization of resources, I would just caution us there. Thank you.
Point well taken. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Secretary Strickler?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Chris?
Mr. Secretary, first of all, thanks so much for the invitation to speak at the governor's press conference for the release of the master plan. I know myself, on behalf of the chamber, we were excited to support certainly that release. But I do have a couple questions, and some of it may be concern. Can you talk a little bit about, the staffing that you currently have and the program that you have and how you're going to administer the funds that you're going to get from BRA and the program, the administration of the funding for the Virginia Community Flood Preparedness Fund, how you're going to do that, and maybe even the levels, because there's been a lot of concern about the amount of monies that may go into the fund and what those funds can be used for. Because I know this morning I was on a call with Virginia Beach Vision, and Tony Utterback did a really good presentation on the plan that Virginia Beach has. And the amount of monies that they were talking about, they're talking about billions of dollars, not millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. And if there's only going to be, say on an annual basis, $45 million in the fund, you can't do a significant project until you have all those funds before you encumber those monies with the Commonwealth. And so I guess, how is that all going to play out? And can these funds be used for studies as opposed to projects? Because I think we may be getting, ahead of our skis a little bit on some of this stuff, and that, we think we're going to have this money, we're going to be able to start spending it in a very, proactive way. But in reality, we really should be doing maybe more studies initially and not just try to get out in front of this thing. The studies that were done in Texas and Louisiana and North Carolina and Florida, they took multiple years to do, and they were, they cost $6 million to do. And the fact that we as a Commonwealth are now going to try to do this in a few months, because by the time you get the RFP out and by the time you get a consultant selected to do this, you're only going to have a few months to do a plan that many states have taken years to do. And I'm just trying to connect all the dots.
I will say, before I pass that on, Senator, to Secretary Strickler, that the legislation we passed during the last General Assembly session that somewhat reconfigured the fund and renamed the fund specifically speaks to Chris studies and the use of the funds in the fund for studies and conducting studies. I think, am I correct, Secretary Strickler?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yeah.
And so, Chris, I do think that would be a really important use of the fund. Again, and to Councilwoman McClellan's point and yours, we know that we're not going to be able to pay for all of the projects that need to get done out of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. There's no, sense that that's something that's realistic. I think our hope is to be able to use that money for a couple of purposes. One is to incentivize things that the Commonwealth has identified through the TAC and through stakeholder engagement have been identified as the right way to approach dealing with problems. And if that just means that we can provide a little bit of cost share, then maybe that's what helps get a project over the hump. And so I think there's a component of that there. Studies certainly are very important. We've talked about the kind of larger, fuller coastal study, which Chris you're exactly right. We are on an ambitious timeline to get that done, although I believe that we'll have the RFP out very soon. And hopefully we'll be able to award a contract. I would like to say by the end of the year. It may slip a little bit past that, but we'd like to get somebody on the ground and really running there. So that study is one that's really important. A lot of folks have talked about updating our Atlas 14 or NOAA's Atlas 14 rainfall data. We're getting some money from VDOT. I think they just announced yesterday that they're going to chip in a little bit of money there, but we've got a ways to go. So updating that resource is something that I think would be potentially a good use of the fund. And so as we develop the guidelines, those are the kind of things that we're keeping in mind. And certainly, once we get a draft out, we'll certainly want your feedback, want everybody else's feedback on, if we're pointing in the right direction. But certainly studies, certainly planning support for localities that aren't as far along as a Norfolk or Virginia Beach and don't have the capacity to do a lot of their own work, getting them up to speed to the point that they're able to take the next step and apply for project funding is an important thing to do. So to your point, Chris, about staffing and about administering the grants program, DCR does have a fairly significant amount of experience in doing, pretty large grants programs. I mean, the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, is accustomed to dealing with multiple millions of dollars a year, maybe not $45 million a year, but in some years they've gotten 12, 15, sometimes as much as $20 million a year. So, while we need to first hire a couple positions in our floodplain program, we've had a couple folks that we lost. We've had a hiring freeze in place for several months. It just got lifted. And so we're gonna be able to bring on some folks there, which I think will be really important. And then, I want to be very careful and cautious about this because I am of the mind that we want to spend as much of this money on projects and on work that helps get projects on the ground, particularly at the local and regional level. However, you identified an important capacity issue, and even with those new positions and with the Coastal Zone Management Program helping us out, there is probably going to be a justification for bringing on a couple of folks at DCR to help administer this. And I hope that's something that we will have people's support for, because it's, while it's, certainly not my goal to just use this money to expand, the size of a state agency. I think it's pretty clear that there's really important work to get done here that we need to be able to get done right, and being efficient and getting money out the door quickly and effectively. It helps to have a few more people to do that. So those would be my thoughts on your question.
Thanks. Chris, did you have another question?
No, thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Any other questions for the Secretary? All right. Thank you, Secretary Strickler. Anything else?
And Chris, just quickly, thank you for your support. Certainly on short notice coming to speak at the governor's event, and thanks for the chamber's support as well. That's huge, and having the business community on board, having the conservation community on board. This is I think a really exciting time for the Commonwealth to make some real progress on coastal resilience. So again, thanks everybody for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you. All right, next up, we're going to have a presentation from ODU on inundation mapping. And George McLeod. George, are you here?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, let's see here. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Coming up. There we go. Yep.
First, thank you to Admiral Phillips and Secretary Strickler for inviting me here, and thank you all for your time to share some details about our flood mapping. We thought this was important to share with you because this flood mapping work and data forms some of the underpinning of the master planning framework. So it was about a year and a half ago that Admiral Phillips approached us in CCRFR at Old Dominion University with the idea of creating a base flood map for all the coastal planning districts of the Commonwealth to help flesh out this master plan. At the time, switch slides. At the time, our thought was that we could use existing data for that purpose, that we could, there was enough data out there with NOAA or with VIMS that we could just gather that data together and repackage it in a way that was meaningful to the local municipalities and the planning districts that make up the coastal region. We quickly discovered that there really wasn't a singular data product that met the needs that were prescribed or that were requested by the state. And those needs were that it covered, that the data set covered the entirety of those 8 coastal planning districts, and that they were specific to a particular NOAA scenario, and that they also included the potential for nuisance flooding, tidal flooding, and other storm-oriented flood events. And so once we identified that that product didn't really exist, we spent some time creating that product for this purpose. And so what is it? And that's kind of the first step and explain to you all. It is a new set of flood maps and data that are tied specifically to the NOAA intermediate high scenario that I think Secretary Strickler mentioned earlier, that pin sea level to three particular years, decadal timeframes, 2040, 2060, and 2080. And those times would represent kind of the short range planning, midterm planning, and long range planning that some of our municipalities and planning districts would engage in. And that NOAA intermediate high, I think as Secretary Strickler mentioned, was chosen specifically for the reason that it lined up with some of the other recommendations like the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission's approach and VIM's recommendation that higher curves that are higher on NOAA's spectrum that you see there in the right side of that slide, that we use those when we're modeling against flood intolerant infrastructure. So knowing that the entire coastal Commonwealth includes a mix of flood tolerant and highly intolerant infrastructure, it's best to take sort of that risk averse approach, that high end approach. So we spent some time creating these essentially new flood maps, and we end up with a data product that looks something like this, or it looks exactly like this. This is a screenshot from our web data viewer that shows the year 2040 data. And this web product does include 2040, 2060, and 2080. And rather than show you all a live demo, you can go out and look at this live website later. I'll just point out what you will see on this data set. When you look at this, you'll see an initial high tide line. This would be the 2019-2020 high tide line. And our flood modeling forecasts where the new high tide line would be in the year 2040. And then we have similar new high tide lines for 2060 and 2080, and that's represented by this dark blue area. What we did is we also intersected those flooding areas with some basic infrastructure that are in the Commonwealth's GIS database, roadways and building footprints and also parcels. And we modeled out which of those pieces of infrastructure would be impacted for each of those years. And so you can see in this slide again, you have things that are colored in red, which would be those which are now beneath the high tide line in that particular year. So you would have building footprints that are now modeled to be below high tide. That's twice a day, every day for into the future. And the same is true with the roadways. And then the orange color on this map represents those features that would be impacted or potentially at risk from tidal nuisance flooding. So these would be the events that occur, 4 to 6 plus times a year, actually increasing, that would also be impacted by maybe a sunny day high tide flood, like we see in the bottom right-hand corner, which is an actual picture of earlier this spring in Cambridge Crescent area of Norfolk, Virginia. And so essentially this becomes the new high tide line as we go forward into the future with sea level rise. And again, this is a static slide that I can't zoom in and out of, but we have representations of this same data for the years 2060 and 2080 for the entire coastal Commonwealth, all 8 planning district commissions. And so, you know, I'm sure most of you have seen other sea level rise or flooding data sets. And so it begs the question, how are these different, and how do these data improve over those data sets? This is the first data set that was specifically designed for the coastal Commonwealth, that was pinned to a scenario requested by the Commonwealth for these particular years for the purpose of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, and also to include recurrent flooding, tidal nuisance flooding. This modeling used the best available data from NOAA to build these projections. And then it's the first to do some basic infrastructure calculation. How many buildings are at risk? What is the total land area in each planning district that's at risk? What's the total miles of roadway, of streets that are at risk from sea level rise and tidal nuisance flooding? And this chart that you see on the right is an excerpt from a report that we actually published in February as a precursor to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan framework. And there are a number of similar charts in that report that we have linked on this slide for your future reference. And you can go in and dig through that. And of course, it's modeled data, so there is some plus or minus. There's some accuracy variance to that. But it gives a good indication of the relative impact of the coastal areas within our Commonwealth. And we are currently creating a data distribution mechanism so that these data can be easily transmitted to you, so that you don't have to make requests and wait long for your planners or your GIS folks to actually get access to the data. We're going to have this available for folks to download in a nice, easy package format. And so how would we suggest that you use these data, or what's next for these data? The pictures on the right of the slide are just an example to show some work that we've done in the past with the Port of Virginia. And you know, my main takeaway, or the thing that I would have you take away from this data set, is that you use it as a starting point. These data highlight areas of vulnerability, and they bring kind of a focused lens to certain communities. And they should be used to identify areas for further investigation, to drill down with that local knowledge that you have in your communities, to really do focused studies on these areas of high importance. There's also a tremendous amount of room for add-on studies. So we've just modeled the extent of sea level rise, the extent of tidal flooding going into the future, but we can add other infrastructure into those assessments, such as septic systems, wetlands migration, highly site-specific studies such as military installations, port infrastructure, and other elements of municipal infrastructure. There's also one of the most obvious next steps would be to start calculating potential costs, either costs of lost property value and or costs of potential lost tax revenue. So when you start to think about that challenge of managed retreat, there is obviously a dollar cost that goes with that, not only to the real property, but a tax revenue cost. And then following on from that, there's opportunity to do just enhanced modeling, where we continue to refine and improve our model as the data improve, as data from NOAA and others improve. Also to add in rainfall, I believe that Secretary Strickler mentioned the Atlas 14 update that would improve rainfall projections for the Commonwealth. That could be added into a model such as this. Adding on storm surge, as we've done here with the Port of Virginia. And then increased storm activity. There's some suggestion that we will see increased tropical activity. And then also the opportunity to model changes in the natural and the built environment. That's something we haven't done in this study. We forecast these sea level areas out to the year 2080, but we have not included any changes to the built environment, any addition of hard infrastructure, any migration of marsh areas or other wetlands. And I think that would be important if you're moving that far into the future to start to model out some of those potential plans. So those are all things that we could add on. And Secretary Strickler mentioned the phrase data-driven approach. And I think that's really our goal as we are the Geospatial Center here at ODU. I'm part of the Commonwealth Center for Current Flooding Resiliency. And I think our role, hopefully, would be to help with that data-driven approach and really provide the best data we can as these plans move forward, as folks plan for their municipal infrastructure to improve or to migrate away. And that being said, I'm happy to have a couple minutes of questions, or if we don't have time for that, there's the contact information for myself and my co-author on the report, Dr. Tom Allen, whom many of you might know, and we're happy to field questions offline as well. So again, I really appreciate your time and speaking to you, and happy to help any way we can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, George. No, we've got plenty of time for questions. So if anyone has any questions for George.
So George, this is Chris Stone. Just a real quick question. What do you think is the best usage for this tool? And I know has been a lot of discussion about getting Virginia to update the Atlas 14, the precipitation, rainfall amounts, looking at the intensity, duration, frequencies, because it affects flooding a whole lot, to a greater degree in some respects, when you add in sea level rise. But what do you think is the best use for this tool going forward?
I think it's twofold, Chris. I think first and foremost, as I mentioned, it's a foundation. So we've provided a standardized foundation of not only sea level, but nuisance flooding potential for the Commonwealth. That does not, as we identified, does not include rainfall, does not include the addition of storm surge. And so those are easy first steps. I mean, I say easy, it's not, snap of the fingers, but I should say obvious first steps. So we know we've neglected other sources of flooding. We're focusing on flooding up from the tidal surface, sea level, and high tide flooding. What are the other major sources of flooding? Obviously, rainfall and precipitation that comes from storms and storm surges. And so adding those in as a next step is probably a nice first step. Secondarily, we talk about a 5-year cycle to revisit these plans. I see this modeling effort as a foundation, as a starting point, and now we have a nice baseline that we can refresh the model going forward. And the hope would be we can continually improve and dial these models in so that they become closer to reality as we move forward. As a modeler, what we'd like to see is 5 years from now, or when we hit the year 2040, unfortunately, we'd like to see that our model was pretty accurate. In this case, we'd rather it not be accurate, but we don't have much of a choice. So that's the idea. Is I think the secondary aspect of that would be to just improve the model to get the data as good as possible. We're talking about making decisions, as you pointed out, that if not in the tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, could be in the billions of dollars. These data better be as good as we can possibly make them. And that's why I see great benefit in getting the data out there, sharing them with anyone and everyone, having folks that do this kind of modeling work together and improve each other's data so that it becomes better and better and can support these high dollar decisions.
Okay, thanks, George.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have a question for Mr. McLeod? Any questions? All right, George, thank you very much. That was great.
Thank you all again. Thank you, Chairman.
And next up, we have Russ Baxter with the DCR. Russ, are you on?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Russ is going to talk to us about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. All right, Russ.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I don't have a lot to add to what Secretary Strickler already talked about today, but just a couple of points, perhaps reiterated a little bit from your last meeting, and some just as Secretary Strickler said, we're moving along internally on working out the logistics of administering what will be, at least in DCR's history, a fairly large grant program. While the focus of today's conversation obviously has been on the coastal areas with the release, as Secretary Strickler outlined, of the framework for the Coastal Master Plan, it's important to remember that the fund that's created, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, is statewide, and which also obviously not only means that it's going to take into issues that are not existent in the coastal zone, but it also obviously spreads the amount of money a little bit thinner across the state. So we are developing and internally and working on the guidelines with an understanding that the state has a number of physiographic regions, each with their own issues as they relate to flooding. And we want this fund, as it moves forward, to be able to handle all sorts of flooding issues, whether they be at the coast or whether they be in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. There were questions about, the staffing of this. The Secretary is absolutely right. We do need some additional horsepower at DCR, but obviously we want to be lean and mean. We want to make sure that these funds are used to develop the proper plans and programs. There was a question earlier, can they be used for studies? And yes, there is specific language regarding studies of regional and statewide importance. And so we're interested in making sure that these funds address those kinds of capacity issues and other things. So again, that is into our thinking, as the Secretary already mentioned. But we also do need some additional expertise and horsepower at DCR in order to be able to administer this. This is, even though it's not going to solve everybody's problems and there's not enough money to do everything, it's still a $50 million grant program. There are going to be a number of grants, a number of moving parts. We need the ability to ensure that the proper technical review is given to proposals. We need to be ensured that the fiscal aspects of grant administration are properly attended to. And so we are working now with the Secretary's office in developing what we believe are the necessary needs that would come along with the administration of this fund. Mr. Chairman, I was asked to sort of be here to answer questions, so I don't want to take a lot of your time giving a speech here. So I would be happy to address any questions, but I thought Secretary Strickler addressed those questions fairly well in his presentation and gave you a good sense of how we're moving forward. But I'd be certainly happy to answer any questions that you or the members of the commission might have.
Great. Thanks, Russ. Any questions for Russ? Keith, do you have a question? No.
I'm gonna take it easy on you, Mr. Chairman, this meeting. I've been fairly quiet today.
Yeah, you have been. You have. Russ, let me ask you a question. Have you started talks with the VRA yet? About
yes, I mean, we met with them actually even last session. The language that's currently in what was your bill is already in the code with respect to our ability to go into an MOA with the Virginia Resources Authority and the ability to use and negotiate some aspects or some portion of the funding for administrative purposes. And we did that specifically because that's language that currently exists in the Dam Safety and Floodplain Protection Fund that we currently administer. So, I neglected to say, and, we've been in the business of administering dam safety and flood prevention funds for a number of years, not to the scale to which this is likely to be. But that working relationship that we've had with VRA, it was our intention, and it was the agreement of the patrons when the bill was introduced or when the bill was under consideration to make that modification to allow us to continue that relationship with VRA. And we'll be moving forward with that.
Okay. All right, thanks. Anybody else have any questions for Russ regarding the fund?
Just a real quick one. Russ, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Is there a percentage of the amount of funds that you receive from VRA that you can use for administrative purposes? And do you have to wait until you receive the funds before you can start to bring staff on to start to administer those funds?
No, first of all, no, there is not a percentage. The language, if you'll allow me to use my mouse for a second, I anticipated that question. So it's simple language that says the authority, and this is from the Act. The authority may disperse from the fund its reasonable costs and expenses occurred in the management of the fund. And so we're going to be negotiating that with the RA, presenting to them what we believe is going to be reasonable expenses needed to manage that are being incurred in the management of the fund. So there isn't a specific percentage, but we use very little of what the current fund that we administer, the flood dam safety and flood protection fund. We use a very small percentage of that, and so I don't anticipate us using a very large percentage of this as well. Remind me of the second part of your question.
You have to wait until you receive the fund.
Oh, yeah. No, we don't. We have a line of credit with the Treasury, and as long as they're convinced that we're going to be able to repay that line of credit, which we would be able to do, we can bring on people in advance of the funds actually being available. My understanding from DEQ is that they come pretty quick. They have the auction and the money's in the bank pretty quick. So we don't, we have that flexibility through our line of credit with the Treasury to bring on folks and do things in advance of the actual money appearing on the ledger.
Okay. Thanks, Russ.
Mr. Chair. And I apologize if this might be something that this group already knows. So you've got the money, you've got a fund set up, assuming localities, regions, whomever will apply for this. Is that, who makes the decision as to who gets what money? Will there be any reporting mechanism? And to whom? How does that all work?
Yeah, we don't see it operating that much differently, frankly, from the way we do business right now. We will put out a grant manual. It will define the types of projects that are eligible for funding. We will receive proposals based on that grant manual. We will have technical review of those proposals with technical staff that review whether it be engineering or other aspects of those proposals that require technical review. We have a scoring sheet where we weight different aspects, based on the priorities that have been identified. And those priorities are always clear. We list them in the grant manual. Here's the kind of proposals we're looking for. And then we have a scoring sheet, and all of that is done, in the light of day. The only difference between this grant process and the existing one is the other one is tied to approval by the Soil and Water Conservation Board. This one, these guidelines are developed and promulgated by the agency itself. We don't have to go to our board for its approval. So there's just a slight procedural difference, but we anticipate running this program just as we have for a long time run the other program. It's just this one's on steroids compared to the amount of money that we've received in the past for our existing grant program.
Thank you, Russ. That was helpful. Mr. Chair, I have a follow-on, if that's okay.
Sure.
So recognizing that this is a lot more money on steroids, but yet you don't have to go to any board or authority to have any approval of the projects. That just seems, is that maybe that was the way it was created legislatively. So I don't know about that.
It is, and that's what the legislature did. And, the dirty little secret, and I don't know who's listening today, but, we take great pains to carefully evaluate grant proposals. And when we bring them to the board, we're fairly confident of the decisions that we've made. And honestly, in my experience at DCR, the board has never not approved the recommendations of the department. And so it's certainly important to have boards to review these sorts of things, and we don't discount the role of the board. And if they wanted to do things differently than the department suggested, we're certainly open to that. But we feel confident in our capacity to make good decisions.
I don't even know what board, would it be this board? Who would be the?
Right now, our existing grant program is the Virginia Soil and Water Conservation Board.
Right. But for the purposes of the flood preparedness
There
fund,
is no board that is involved in the administration of this fund.
and who chooses what the priorities are?
That will be done because the legislation specifically calls for us to consult with the Chief Resiliency Officer / Secretary of Natural Resources, Secretary Strickler in this case, with the Special Assistance for Coastal Adaptation, Admiral Phillips. And so before we would release final guidelines, and also the Secretary already talked about a robust public engagement process before the guidelines become final. But it is in the code that we confer with those two individuals at a minimum. Obviously, there's a lot more people involved. A lot of stakeholders are very interested in this, but that's what's required in the code.
Thanks. I would tell you that I know our PDC is very interested in
I've
having a seat at the table.
I've already been made aware of that and received several emails to that effect. Certainly.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Russ? All right, very good. Russ, thanks for your time. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you.
Next up, sticking to our agenda, we've got a time slot on here for discussions for legislative proposals for review and recommendation. And obviously, as I indicated, the opening, we'll be doing that in addition when we have this December meeting as well. And Kelly, I don't know if you want to talk about what we're working on now, or if you want to put that off until our December meeting. I'll leave that up to you.
Oh, no, thank you, Senator Lewis. We can talk more about it in December. It's in draft form right now. The City of Virginia Beach requested, this bill, and so we're working on it at the moment, and we will have a more updated version before the next meeting for sure. So we definitely can wait until December.
And does anybody else have anything specifically legislatively they want to talk about now? Or as I said, we're going to have plenty of time in December to talk about that as we get closer to the session. And hopefully we'll have some more guidance about what the session is actually going to look like by the time we have that meeting. So,
Mr. Chairman, hey, this is Keith. You know me. Actually, because of the pandemic, Mr. Chairman, we probably won't have a slew of bills like we normally do, just not enough time to brainstorm. We are working something on septic and possibly a fix on septic and flooded systems and getting them out of harm's way. And I actually have two UVA students, law students that are working with me. They're doing a little bit of research and working to draft a bill and giving me a little bit of help. And we possibly they may be reaching out to all of you for questions and the agencies, but may bring them back for a presentation at the next meeting.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
And Legislative Services is thrilled to hear that you're using UVA law students.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I'm sure they'll like that.
Yeah.
So we'll bring something back to the next meeting.
Okay, great. That would be perfect. Okay. Thanks. Anybody else?
So, Mr. Chairman, I know I sent 3 pieces of proposed legislation to your office. I know that your legislative aide, Jesse, I think, sent those out to everyone that's on the committee. It's just for consideration, but there is one on including resiliency and smart scale. And I know that Councilwoman Henley was working on that. And so, if anybody's interested in working on that, I certainly would be, would like to work on that with them, because I've done a lot of research into this. There's also 2 other pieces of legislation that I would like for people to consider in December, and that really has to do with incorporation of resiliency. And resiliency is a very broad term in their long range comprehensive plans. But just so you know, I'm not a legislator. I've done the best I can at trying to craft legislation. If you look at the agenda, everybody that's on this committee is the honorable, and I'm the one that's not. So I hope that's not an impugnment on my character, but anybody that would like to work on legislation, I'll be more than happy to do that with them.
Well, Chris, actually, that's what Delegate Congress Fowler and I have been drafting right now, is the smart scale piece that you mentioned.
Okay.
So I'm happy to bat that out with you as soon as we get a draft, in advance of the December meeting for your thoughts and everybody else too, for that matter, so we can really bat it around in December.
Okay. Well, likewise, I have sent you a draft of my proposal for including that.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else?
Senator Lewis.
Yeah, it's Councilwoman McClellan. Mhm.
So just FYI, we did unanimously pass the 4 pieces of flooding related legislation as part of our regional legislative package from the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. So I'd like to follow up with you directly to talk about those and see if there might be some interest. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. And this is an appropriate time. This is sort of, we're skipping one element of the agenda, but since we're talking a lot about the December meeting, is there anything else? And it sounds like we may have depending upon the realities of the short session, we may have a pretty full docket for legislative discussion. But is there anything else anybody would like to see on our taken up in December? And you really, if you have something on your mind right now, that's fine. Otherwise, you can email us after this meeting, just so we can get it teed up if we have room on the agenda. Anybody have any thoughts? Perfect. Okay.
Well, maybe this, I'll ask one question. Maybe this is just a point of order. I don't know. If we're going to reserve the December meeting for talking about legislation and we only have an hour and a half, is there an opportunity to consult outside that meeting on legislation before the meeting in December?
Well, we have a couple hours actually, so that helps a little bit. But that's Chris. That's the way we roll, unfortunately. And we'll try to get as much of it out as we can in advance, so people can get schooled on the proposals that we're going to be discussing. But again, that's just the unfortunate reality is our part-time citizen legislature. But we do the best we can with what we got. So, anybody else? All right, and again, if anybody has any thoughts or ideas about this December meeting, the poll is going to go out tomorrow for the December meeting. And typically we have one in January as well before the session. So we'll see how that all plays out. We'll see what happens with December, and we'll see what we're able to do in January in advance of the General Assembly session. So the other thing we have on our agenda, and actually the actual last action item on the agenda is, I think we all sent out a proposed letter to Secretary Strickler regarding some, I guess we'll call them action items that some folks, including myself, feel might be help us in our ability to do our job here as this advisory committee, joint advisory committee for the Assembly, and developing policy regarding recurrent coastal flooding, sea level rise. And there are some questions there that I think if we have some more, or if they're more fleshed out as to the process and the timelines in particular. And also one thing we're all, I think, concerned about is public input in developing some of these policies and guidelines that we've all alluded to, Russ has alluded to regarding the fund. And then we've got other resiliency and sea level rise initiatives out there that, again, would probably help us do our jobs a little better if we have some more answers as to how those things are going to be developed. So I hope everybody's had time to review the letter. If there are any questions or discussion about the letter, now would be the appropriate time to have it. And obviously what we'd be looking for is the stamp of approval of the committee to send that on to Senator Strickler. Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing in the letter, greatly appreciate you doing this. Somehow to include more, give tools to homeowners to protect their properties is ultimately what we're looking for. So we have in the last Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. It is important to protect. Ultimately, water quality is first, but we need recognition that we need to give the localities options to help the homeowner, how they can manage the flooding and not necessarily to further protect the ecosystems. Our charge is here to protect the ecosystems at or at least where they are, make it better, but also have the resiliency aspect. But just to reinforce that, that's what we're looking for.
I understand, but I think what the thrust of this letter and the issue that brought it up or brought it to the forefront with some of us was just the existing processes that are underway.
Sure.
In a timeline, specifically, and most importantly, a timeline and the ability, the assurance that there's going to be adequate public process, because this doesn't go through the most of this does not flow through or fall under the rubric of the Administrative Act. So that's kind of, I get the policy piece you're talking about, but this is more just like, hey, where are you? When can we expect something from it? And are you going to let the public have input?
Gotcha. And part of that, if I may continue, we've had discussions with DEQ, and they recognize the challenges we, in particular, have in the rural coastal region for solving these problems. They've acknowledged that and recognized that, and they were working. They thought they had the ability. They said they had the ability to do some things. I think we need to have them back as well. Don't know if we need to include that in the letter, but maybe have them at the December meeting.
Oh yeah, sure.
To find out where they are in the process. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Shoot us an email on that to remind.
Yeah, will do.
Okay. Anybody else thoughts on the letter? It's a quiet group. You guys are just must have been up late last night, right? Okay.
I was an election officer yesterday, so yes, I was up late last night.
You were up late, Chris. Good for you. All right. So I guess what we would like, or what I would like, in order to send this on to Secretary Strickler, is an affirmative vote of the committee. And with that, Sean, can you call the roll for us?
Delegate Keene,
Aye.
Delegate Converse Fowler,
Kelly?
Aye. Sorry, aye.
Delegate Askew,
Aye.
Delegate Hodges,
Aye.
Delegate Ranson,
Aye.
Senator Kiggins,
Aye.
Senator Locke,
Aye.
Councilwoman McClellan,
Aye.
Chris Stone,
Aye.
Delegate Bouchard,
Aye.
Chairman Lewis.
Aye. Did you get
The vote is
Senator Locke?
unanimous.
I don't think you got Senator Locke, did you?
Oh, pardon me. No, I believe I did.
Yeah,
Senator
I said
Locke.
aye.
Did you? Okay, I missed it. Sorry.
Pardon me.
All right, very good. Then we'll get that out to Senator Strickler, and hopefully we will get some answers and some more meat on the bones of these various initiatives that we have going. Is there anything else before we adjourn? We've made a record time today. I don't know if we'll be able to do that in December, but anybody else have anything for the good of the cause? All right, thank you all so much, and we'll start polling for the December meeting tomorrow. So see you in December. Meeting's adjourned.
All right. Thanks.